Thanks, Baby. There's a question in front here.
Thanks. My name's Phil. I work in the health department, and I've been working there for 25 years and doing the actual hard stuff about trying to turn some of this theory into actual government policy. And it's a bloody hard yakka. Can I first of all thank each of the panellists for the perspective they've brought, and I have to declare an interest here. I worked with BB some 25 years ago, and I want to use that example as one of the elements I think is missing from the discussion we've had so far. I was involved in the very early days of HIV/AIDS, and in the midst of all that horror, one of the things that struck out as a shining light, and one of the things that's missing from this discussion about social determinants and the mediating issues and the horizontal vertical stuff you were talking about, Michael, which I think was very good, is the whole notion of community empowerment. The reason why we made progress on HIV/AIDS in Australia was because the people who were directly affected took up the power to do something about it themselves. The gay men, sex workers, the injecting drug users, people with haemophilia, all stood up and said, "This isn't good enough. We have to do something about it. We want things to change." I remember being in meetings with professors and certain doctors who I won't name now, and having the same thoughts in my head as Bibi just expressed before, and telling them they were full of crap, and being in front of ministers of health and banging the table, and that notion that consumers of health are not just mere vessels to be filled up with the cure, but are actually part of the cure themselves. And that things like health literacy and empowerment are not just facile nonsense. It's not just a theoretical construct. It actually makes a difference to people's lives on a daily basis. I think that's one of the missing elements we talk about in terms of mediation. Yes, in making the social determinants of health real for people's lives every day is a massive task, but empowering people on a daily basis to make the healthy choice, the easy choice. I know it's a cliche, but I still think that actually has a lot of power in it as well. I'd be interested in responses from the panel on that sort of perspective.
Well, let me start. The fundamental notion of sustainable development is just what you said. It's got to be community empowerment. And the World Vision model of 15 years in a community from 15 to 100,000 people working across health and water and microfinance and gender empowerment is to say, we will leave, the money will stop, this is your community, and it will only be sustainable if you actually own this, run it. That's simply what sustainable development means, including advocacy. So if it's a school built saying, well, who should build the school? And they'll always say the government should. Well, you don't need World Vision then. And they'll go, oh, who knows where the education budget went? Palaces, weapons, Swiss bank accounts. To say, well, here's the deal, we'll work with you on the school on condition you let us train you to know what was in the education budget. Train you with the skills to track where that money went. Train you then how to organise to put pressure on the government, because you'll have a school, but when we're gone, will you have teachers? Will you have the power to sustain this? We call that citizens' voice advocacy. So absolutely fundamental to good health is that sense that I can make a difference. And one of the books I've read lately by a Frenchman around the geopolitics of emotion, he says, increasingly in the West, particularly America and the West is gripped by the emotion of fear. In America's case, it's that the Chinese are going to win. We're never going to pay our debt out. We think anything the government does is now called socialism, even communism. Even a health plan is called communism. And there's this sense of fear, as opposed to what you're describing there, a sense of hope, that we actually can make a difference, take this into our own control. And that sense of hope is fundamental to health. When you lose hope, you lose a whole lot of health outcomes. So I think it's incredibly important.
There's a couple of things that I just want to pick up on. One thing you said is making the healthy choice the easy choice. And Tim, you talked about the nanny state. Now, to make the healthy choice the easy choice, you need a nanny state because, and I don't regard that as a criticism, at the moment our choices are very much determined for us. Unfortunately, it's less determined by the government and more determined by far less democratic forces, and the balance needs to shift. But the other thing that I wanted to respond to was the gay community, sex workers and drug users in this country were able to respond because by and large they had educations and they had incomes and they were prepared to stand up and be counted. And if we want that sort of involvement globally, well then there are a lot of things we need to put in place first. And part of that again is what Tim was describing. But even more than that, as you know, Phil, a group that I've worked with in Australia and internationally for it's over 30 years now as sex workers, and there are moral issues that need to be addressed before we can even think about getting sex workers and their children into the doors of schools. So that sort of community health literacy is a very long, long way away from quite a number of communities.
Thanks, maybe time for just one more question and comment if there was one in the front here.
Good evening, my name is Simon Way. Going back to, I suppose, the community empowerment, and I'm really quite interested to find out sort of what recommendations you might give as probably the most impactful things that we can do as a population or as a country to maybe address these global inequalities of health and poverty. So, quite interested if you had a closing view on that.
Well, I think Michael wants to talk about medical research.
Look, this is going to sound pathetic, but I actually seriously believe it, that if we could only begin by being nice to each other. Because we really are horrible. You know, this is why I think the world's going to come to an end in 50 years, but the lack of interest in the well-being of those beyond our immediate families, I think is extraordinary. And if we really, as a community, did care about others, maybe we could get movement on climate change. Even if we cared about our own offspring and their offspring before the Earth gets sucked into the sun a billion years from now. But we don't even seem to be able to manage that.
Let me, before I slip my wrists, you were never this pessimistic that many years ago at law school. Let me say that to answer your question, I think it's the paradox that I often quote Adam Smith, who said, the father of market capitalism, laissez-faire, he said, humans are simultaneously self-interested and other-interested. Self-regarding was his word, and other-regarding. Self-regarding is, I'm just going to look after myself. And I don't care if I stand on the shoulders of others and I'm not responsible for anyone else. And at the same time, this remarkable human capacity, we particularly see it in disasters, where there is this extraordinary solidarity and sympathy and empathy and care, and both, he said, are true. I think one of my hopes in addressing this is that in a global village where someone beyond your shore or elsewhere was really just other regarding, if I've got a little bit of energy or money left, I'll think of them. In a global village, it's actually become self-regarding to be other regarding. These two have started to fuse together because of the world being a waterbed and climate change affecting all of us, and bank failures in America affecting the Western system, because of the extraordinary reality of swine flu, of the number of refugees who will be headed our way if we don't deal with poverty and climate change. So that's a security issue. Suddenly, being other regarding, others interested, is also being self-regarding. So I think there is a basis of appeal there if we can start to make it.
Michael, what to do as a closing comment?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it should be the closing comment, but it's. I have a very simple, I guess, view to this sort of very important question, very moral question. I agree with Bibi and Tim. I think, in part, I think imparting to your children proper values is the most important thing. And I'm an optimist. I'm not a pessimist like her. I'm an optimist, and I think the good guys will ultimately win out. So I actually think if you bring up your children with proper values, that's all you need to do.